Thanks very much. Joining us now is California Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Schiff, is KT MacFarland's apparent inaccurate statement to Congress a lie? And if so, should there be any repercussions?
Well, it certainly appears that it was a false statement. If she wrote in that written response as a follow-up to her oral testimony that she wasn't aware of any of these discussions, and in fact, those reports are accurate that she was one of those senior transition officials, then yes, it's a false statement. Now, I don't know who those senior transition officials are. That has been publicly reported, but that's not something I can tell you from our investigation. We want her to come before the House Intelligence Committee. I think that's going to be very important. But yes, it seems hard to escape the conclusion that if she said to the Senate, I'm not aware of these conversations, and she was one of those senior transition officials, and those emails, if they're accurate, that have been publicly released, it certainly appears that was a directly false representation to the Senate.
Now that President Trump has seemed to confirm that he knew Michael Flynn had lied to the FBI, or had reason to believe he'd lied to the FBI when he asked former FBI Director Comey to drop the investigation into him, in your view, does that amount to obstruction of justice? And do you believe the president can be charged with obstruction of justice?
It's certainly evidence that goes to obstruction of justice. And yes, I believe the president is no more above the law than any other American. It would be an absurd result to say that the president could interfere within investigations involving himself or others potentially, and that he is immune from any repercussion. I don't think that the Congress, which would ultimately make that decision whether this would rise to the level of a crime or misdemeanor, I don't think the Congress would ever tolerate a president willfully obstructing justice and say, no, he's above the law, we can't do anything about it. The fact that he has the power to fire the FBI director doesn't mean that he has the power to fire him for an illicit reason, any more than any other employer has the right to fire an employee who's an at-will employee, can fire that employee for the employee's refusal to do something wrong or based on other illicit motive.
Even if Robert Mueller were to determine the president did obstruct justice, what would happen then? I mean, a censure or an impeachment is, as you said, is up to Congress, which obviously is controlled by Republicans. They haven't shown an appetite for anything like that yet.
Well, that's true. You know, I don't think there's any kind of constitutional bar, for example, to the special counsel actually indicting a sitting president. But there are lots of prudential reasons why that wouldn't happen. I think rather he would make a report to Congress that might say, this is what I found, and if you found evidence of obstruction, here's the evidence. You'll have to weigh whether you think that rises to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor. Now, Anderson, I tried an impeachment case in the Senate some years ago when I was on the House Judiciary Committee, and we impeached a federal judge. And there's a legal standard in terms of what constitutes a high crime and misdemeanor, but there's a very practical standard as well. And in this Congress, that practical standard is, would Republican members ever go back to their Republican districts and be able to make the case that what the president did was so wrong that he had to be removed from office, and this wasn't simply about nullifying an election that other people didn't like. That's a pretty high bar, but this president is capable of clearing that bar if he was actively involved in trying to obstruct an investigation that he believed might lead back to him.
Just lastly, there is new reporting today that Paul Manafort was ghostwriting an unpublished editorial on Ukraine with a Russian who has ties to Russian intelligence. Mueller's office is arguing that this violates the terms of Manafort's bail. Do you think it does? I mean, you're a former prosecutor yourself.
Well, if the condition of bail was not making public statements that could influence the impartiality of a potential jury, then absolutely. And it's hard to imagine a more boneheaded move if he did this. And I have to think that unless he has really incompetent counsel, his counsel must not have been aware that he was doing this, because he would have certainly advised Manafort not to go near Russians and certainly not to be creating op-eds and ghostwriting them. There's no better way to end up having your bail revoked and your liberty confined. So I can't imagine under what circumstances Manafort thought this was a good idea. But I would say that the special counsel has an awfully good case to make why this bail condition ought to be revoked.
Yeah, I mean, the bail agreement would have freed Manafort from house arrest and GPS monitoring. Do you think those conditions should be off the table right now?
Well, you know, if he wrote this or ghost wrote an op-ed and he was trying to place this in clear violation of the court's instruction, then I think he's dead in the water in terms of getting any further relaxation of his conditions of effectively home confinement. So I have to imagine that a judge is not going to take this lightly at all, having appeared before a great many federal judges when I was a prosecutor. The last thing they want to learn is that someone that they've given a generous bail condition to has violated the terms of that and effectively tried to conceal it from the court.
Yeah. Congressman Schiff, I appreciate your time. Thank you.